So hello and welcome to today's video. Now, as you're probably aware, Rockstar Games is a conglomerate made up of multiple individual Rockstar studios, mostly based in the United Kingdom and the United States, but do have studios in Canada, Japan and India. Now, back in the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, and of course older, most studios were kind of working on their own thing. Like Rockstar North were responsible for Grand Theft Auto Manhunt, San Diego were responsible for developing Red Dead Redemption, and Leeds were behind the PSP GTA games. And nearly every single Rockstar studio used to be their own company before they got rebranded and merged into the gaming giant we know today. And in this video we'll be taking a look at the history of one of the first studios to be merged into Rockstar Games, alongside being one of the most impactful studios, Rockstar North, and their pre-Rockstar Games history of another gaming behemoth, Nintendo. Now of course, prior to becoming Rockstar North in 2002, they were named DMA Design, and even managed to publish a few Grand Theft Auto titles under this name too. But of course they didn't just develop GTA and become Rockstar North overnight, they have a pretty in-depth history. And this history with Nintendo kind of gives an insight into why we don't really see any brand new Rockstar titles on Nintendo platforms. And no, I'm not just talking about graphics here, even though in today's age that is a pretty big reason, as there's no way in hell you're going to get Red Dead Redemption 2 running on a Switch anytime soon. So in the early days of Rockstar North's life, or well, DMA Design should I say, they were under a rather small studio named Psygnosis, and they published a lot of games for them on a variety of platforms, such as the Amiga, the Commodore 64 and even MS-DOS. And they seem to have a pretty good relationship with Psygnosis business-wise, even creating their most popular title at the time, Lemmings. However, in 1993, DMA's partnership with Psygnosis was cut, as Psygnosis were acquired by Sony Interactive for $48 million. As many wondered why Sony never tried to buy a more well-known studio. Of course, the acquisition also threw DMA Design under a bus, as they had to seek out new partners to develop titles for, and as such they approached Nintendo. And after a few meetings, DMA and Nintendo signed a contract, and Nintendo agreed to publish DMA's newest title, Unirally, or Uniracers if you're in the US, as an exclusive title for the Super Nintendo. Now, Unirally was a 2D side-scrolling racer, where you also performed stunts to help you get a good amount of speed, etc. And the game was reviewed rather positively and sold considerably well for the debut SNES title, and Nintendo themselves were really pleased at DMA's results. But this is kind of where the rocky relationship began, as DMA Design were being sued by Pixar, who claimed the sprites of the unicycles used in Unirally strongly resembled the unicycle from their 1987 film Red Stream. And after a side-by-side comparison in court of the unicycle from Unirally and the unicycle from Red Stream, the judge ruled in favour of Pixar, and as such Nintendo were forced to stop any more new copies of Unirally being published worldwide, and as such only about 300,000 copies were developed total. Because of this, the game is rather uncommon to find and can sell for upwards of $200 online depending on the condition. Now of course nobody at DMA or Nintendo were really happy about this, as to quote former developer Robbie Graham, they took footage from Red Stream and compared it to Unirally, and the unicycles were virtually the same. This is not a big surprise, as there's not a lot of ways you can bring a unicycle to life without it looking like the one Pixar did. The judge, being the moron that he is, agreed with Pixar. Now shortly after the court case, DMA were tasked by Nintendo to help develop a title for the Kirby franchise, and the game DMA would be making would be known as Kid Kirby, once again another Super Nintendo exclusive title, which would have utilised the SNES mouse accessory. But this game was cancelled, as the game played abysmally with the SNES mouse, and it couldn't play well with a normal controller either. Plus the SNES mouse was already a terrible selling accessory, so Nintendo had the entire project cancelled late into development. It was actually canned quite close to release too, as in some Nintendo magazines in Mexico it was stated for release in Christmas 1995. Now according to developer Mike Daly, there is a fully playable build of Kid Kirby that was published, but it's currently lost to time. So after this project, DMA and Nintendo kind of went on their separate ways for a little bit. DMA began studying developing for the 3DO Interactive for about 6 months, before Nintendo contacted them again and offered to publish another DMA Design title for their upcoming console, the Ultra 64. Now this time it would be a launch title. Now the team at the DMA Design were really ecstatic and positive about this, as they even said the following about developing for the Ultra 64. It's really well designed and we haven't even scratched the surface yet. It's scary. The drawing chip is a masterpiece of engineering. There are no hassles for developers compared to other systems. You don't have to worry about clipping, the console just handles it. So DMA got down to brainstorming ideas of what they wanted to publish on Nintendo's newest console, and they actually came up with Body Harvest. So they started getting down to work on developing that. And Nintendo really wanted to show this off at Shoshinkai, commonly known as the Famicom Space World in 1995, as part of the 13 titles Nintendo were going to release at the launch of the Nintendo 64. At this event however, only 2 titles had playable demos, these being Super Mario 64 and Kirby Bowl 64. The other 11 titles only had footage and trailers to go off, and many attendees actually criticised Body Harvest as being the most incomplete out of all the games shown here. But thankfully for them, the attendees knew that everything here was still a work in progress, so it didn't get too much flack. Hell, Mario 64 was only about 50% done at this time, and I believe you can even see some footage of that build up on YouTube that isn't a Wario head creepypasta. Anyway, behind the scenes, Body Harvest development wasn't going too well at all. Nintendo and DMA were constantly debating about the content of Body Harvest, saying it was far too violent for that platform, looked too realistic, and the communications weren't really helped by the accent and language barrier between the Japanese studio and the Scottish developers. In fact, numerous occasions this problem occurred, so it ended up being a miscommunication resulting in wasted time due to misunderstandings, such as DMA developing, changing or removing something Nintendo didn't want or request for. And as such, Body Harvest failed to meet the deadline for the Nintendo 64 launch. Now David Jones, the head of design at DMA, described their relationship with Nintendo as, "It's a very hard relationship because their quality is so high." Now of course Nintendo were absolutely furious at DMA for failing to meet their expected deadline, so they completely cancelled development of Body Harvest entirely. Nintendo also didn't forget how DMA kinda let them down with the development of Kid Kirby either, and as such they did not work together on any more projects again, as all three projects DMA and Nintendo worked on were complete failures. Uniracers was essentially banned from ever being published again due to a copyright infringement claim by Pixar. Kid Kirby played like crap and was on an even worse selling accessory, so it seemed like the game was doomed to be a financial failure from the beginning, and Body Harvest failed to meet deadlines due to constant miscommunications and debates between Nintendo and DMA. Now a few years would pass and DMA would be bought out by British studio Gremlin Interactive for £4.2 million, and Gremlin Interactive finally helped DMA publish Body Harvest on the Nintendo 64 in 1998. Despite Nintendo still disliking how violent the game was compared with a large majority of their more family friendly and child friendly titles. But DMA were now happy as they could finally develop their games a bit more freely now. Now of course there were multiple releases, attempts and ports brought to Nintendo consoles, but not all of them went too well. For example, Rockstar Games teamed up with the creators of Fallout, Interplay, to develop Earthworm Jim in 1999. There was also the absolutely abysmal Austin Powers Game Boy Color attempt, but either way Rockstar never really worked with Nintendo on another product again. Now DMA would eventually be acquired by Take-Two Interactive in 1999 for $11 million, after having their then publisher BMG Interactive sold to Take-Two as well. BMG would become Rockstar Games as we know them today, and DMA would go underneath the wing of Rockstar Games and continue to make Grand Theft Auto 2 and 3 before they got rebranded into Rockstar North just before the release of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and thus beginning the Rockstar Games empire alongside the likes of Rockstar Toronto and Lincoln. Now, after the release of Grand Theft Auto on the PlayStation 1, there were plans to publish a port of this onto the Nintendo 64. It would have better graphics, some new missions, etc. But it was cancelled for unknown reasons. It could be Nintendo were not liking the content of Grand Theft Auto, much like they did with Body Harvest, but we still got ports of GTA 1 and 2 on the Game Boy Color, which received mixed to positive reviews. But it seems the incidents of the 90s weren't forgotten about in the PS2 era. Rockstar were under an exclusivity contract to publish Grand Theft Auto for the PlayStation 2 only. And when that contract was up, Rockstar released GTA 3, Vice City and San Andreas for the PC and Xbox. But no titles were ported to the Gamecube. Nintendo would not really see a mainline title from Rockstar ever again, with them only getting Bully Scholarship Edition on the Nintendo Wii, which was already a port of a nearly 2-year-old game at this point, and Manhunt 2, which got banned in many countries already. With the exception of 2 handheld specific Grand Theft Autos, these being GTA Advance and Chinatown Wars, there haven't been any new titles on a Nintendo console since. Of course, as mentioned at the beginning, it just seems very unlikely we'll ever see a brand new Rockstar release on a Nintendo platform. Not just because of the history, but because of how since the 7th generation, both Nintendo and Rockstar took completely different paths in development, with Rockstar being focused more on graphically impressive, expansive and detailed products, while Nintendo focused less on that and more on unique ways to play, albeit on weaker consoles, but incredibly unique setups like motion controllers, portability, and being a massive success with their own first party lineups like Mario, Smash Bros, Zelda, F-Zero, probably not that one. Of course it's possible we could see ports of other older titles, like how the Switch does tend to get ports of 7th generation titles a lot, and we already have seen LA Noire ported to the Switch. But don't expect Red Dead Redemption 2, GTA 5, Bully 2 or GTA 6 to be released there anytime soon. But that wraps up today's video, thank you for watching and have a great day.